In the beginning there was a silence that breathed with the essence of life. It was the stillness of a world spoken into existence by the divine. This was the Garden of Eden, a lush sanctuary where light danced through the emerald leaves of trees, and rivers flowed with the clarity of crystal. Everything was in perfect, delicate balance. The air carried the scent of jasmine and earth, and every creature moved with a grace that spoke of undisturbed peace. In the center stood Adam, fashioned from the dust he walked upon. To Adam, the earth was not merely a place to reside, it was a living extension of his own being. He was the steward, the guardian, and the voice of a creation that looked to him for its name. Day after day, Adam walked through the groves, his heart brimming with a joy that had no name, because sorrow did not yet exist. He felt the rhythmic pulse of the world and the warmth of the divine presence that walked beside him in the cool breeze. Yet, amidst the majesty of eagles and the golden gaze of lions, a subtle realization took root in Adam's soul. He was the only one who could look up at the heavens and speak. He was the only one who carried the image of the Creator. In the vastness of this paradise, he searched for a reflection that the animals could not provide. He was surrounded by life, yet he was profoundly alone in his consciousness. During this time of reflection, God gave Adam the first and only boundary of his existence. The garden was a testament to divine generosity, filled with fruit that was both pleasing and nourishing. But in the heart of the sanctuary stood two trees that held the weight of eternity. The tree of life offered a continuation of this blissful immortality, while the tree of the knowledge of good and evil stood as a sentinel of choice. God's instruction was clear. Adam was free to eat from any tree, but the fruit of knowledge was forbidden. This was a sacred test of trust. It was an invitation for Adam to choose love over mere instinct. To prove his devotion to the Creator was a conscious act of free will. Seeing Adam's need for a companion, the Creator brought forth a partner from Adam's own side. When Eve opened her eyes, the world seemed to click into perfect alignment. She was his equal, his partner, his own flesh and bone. Together they navigated the wonders of Eden, their bond representing the pinnacle of human relationship. They were naked and completely unashamed, for there was no guilt to hide, no shadow of self-consciousness to mar their intimacy. Their shared purpose was simple: to tend the garden, to love one another, and to dwell in the light of God's wisdom. They lived in a state of absolute reliance on the Creator. Every sunrise was a promise of continued grace, and every sunset was a moment of gratitude. They wandered through the orchards, the weight of the forbidden tree barely a thought, for the abundance of the garden left them wanting for nothing. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The freedom they enjoyed was a vast, limitless ocean, and the single restriction was but a tiny island they had no reason to visit. However, the atmosphere of Eden began to shift, almost imperceptibly. A new presence had entered the foliage, one that did not move with the power of elephants. High within the branches of the forbidden tree, a subtle shimmer caught the light. It was the serpent, cunning and watchful, the most subtle of creatures. His eyes did not reflect adoration. They burned with cold intelligence. As Adam and Eve enjoyed the warmth of another perfect day, the first shadow of doubt was about to be cast across the soil of paradise, threatening to unravel the very fabric of their innocence. The serpent did not approach with a roar. He moved with the fluid grace of a whisper, sliding through the emerald canopy toward the woman. He did not deny God's existence, but he began to reshape the narrative of his character. "Did God really say you shall not eat of every tree?" he asked, his tone laced with a feigned curiosity. This was the first move, restricting their freedom by questioning the divine word. He ignored the thousands of trees they could enjoy and forced Eve's gaze onto the one they could not. He planted the seed of a revolutionary idea, that God was withholding something essential, that his love was actually a cage built of secrets and silence. Eve looked at the tree with eyes that were no longer satisfied. The serpent's words acted like a corrosive acid on her perspective. He promised her that her eyes would be opened, that she would be like God, knowing good and evil. This was the ultimate lure, the promise of independence. Suddenly, the tree was no longer a symbol of trust. It was an obstacle to her potential. She saw the fruit was a delight to the eyes, promising the wisdom she now craved. She began to wonder why the Creator would want to keep such a gift for himself. She felt a surge of autonomy that felt like power, a hunger that no other fruit in the garden could satiate. In a moment that seemed to suspend the breath of creation, Eve reached out. Her fingers brushed the skin of the fruit, and for a heartbeat, the garden held its breath. She took a bite. The taste was sweet, but the sweetness carried a hidden weight. As the juice stained her lips, the first crack appeared in the foundation of the world. She had stepped across the threshold of the forbidden, choosing her own path over the divine design. She felt a rush of adrenaline, a false sense of enlightenment that blinded her to the coming darkness. When Adam found her, the atmosphere had already begun to sour. He saw the fruit in her hand and the different light in her eyes. He understood the gravity of the moment instantly. Yet, as he looked at Eve, a terrifying realization gripped his heart. To choose God was to lose the woman who was flesh and bone. Adam chose the gift over the giver. He did not eat because he was deceived, but because he could not bear the thought of an eternity without her. He took the fruit from her hand and ate, choosing to join her in the shadows rather than remain in the light of the Father. The transformation was instantaneous. The golden radiance that had always seemed to emanate from within them vanished, replaced by a cold, hollow sensation. Their eyes were indeed opened, but not to the glory the serpent had promised. They were opened to their own fragility. For the first time, they noticed their nakedness, and it was no longer a sign of innocence. It was a source of excruciating shame. They scrambled to cover themselves, stitching together fig leaves in a futile attempt to hide their fallen state. The harmony of their bond was severed, replaced by a self-consciousness that acted as a wall between them. Fear, a stranger to Eden until this moment, now reigned in their hearts. The rustle of the wind no longer sounded like a song, it sounded like a threat. They retreated into the deepest thickets, trying to disappear. They were terrified. The silence of the garden, once peaceful, now felt heavy and accusatory. They waited in the darkness of the foliage, hoping it would swallow their guilt. But the Creator would not let the silence remain. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, a familiar sound drifted through the trees. It was the rhythmic sound of footsteps walking through the garden. It was the divine presence seeking his children. Every step resonated through the soil, vibrating in the hearts of the hiding pair. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The silence was finally broken by a voice that once spoke worlds into being, now calling out into the trees. "Where are you?" The question reverberated through the trees, heavy with a sorrow that Adam and Eve had never known. The voice was not just a search for location, but a call to the soul. God did not ask because he was ignorant of their hiding place. He asked to give them a chance to step back into the light of honesty. Emerging from the shadows, Adam's voice was thin and brittle. He confessed that he heard the sound of the Creator and hid because he was naked and afraid. In that single sentence, the history of human fear began. The transparency they had once enjoyed was gone, replaced by a desperate need for distance. When the Creator asked if they had eaten from the forbidden tree, the silence that followed was the sound of a shattering world. Their intimacy evaporated, replaced by the bitter instinct of self-preservation. The perfect emotional bond that had once sustained them was now a source of tension. Adam, who had once celebrated Eve as bone of his bones, now looked at her with an accusatory gaze. He told God that the woman he provided gave him the fruit. This blame suggested both Eve and the Creator were responsible for his failure. When the question turned to Eve, she did not find refuge in her husband's protection. Instead, she pointed toward the serpent, claiming she was deceived. The unity of the first couple lay in ruins, replaced by a cycle of finger-pointing. The selfless love of Eden was poisoned by the arrival of the ego. The divine response changed the rhythm of existence. To the serpent, God spoke a curse to crawl in the dust, a symbol of humiliation. Turning to Eve, the Creator spoke of a future where the joy of bringing life would be shadowed by intense pain. The harmony between the sexes would be replaced by struggle. To Adam, God declared the ground was cursed. The earth would no longer yield its fruit with ease. Adam would spend his days battling thorns and thistles, eating by the sweat of his brow until the day he returned to the dust from which he was formed. Death was now their inescapable destination. The emotional weight of this exile was a crushing tide. Adam and Eve looked at their home, realizing they were foreigners in paradise. They could no longer walk with the divine in the cool of the day. The bridge of trust was burned. Yet the Creator showed a mercy that whispered of restoration. To replace their fragile fig leaves, God provided garments of animal skins. This was a harrowing moment. To clothe their shame, life had to be taken. The first blood was shed on the soil of Eden, a foreshadowing that a sacrifice would one day be required to cover the sins of the world. Amidst the ruins, a beam of hope pierced the darkness. God spoke a promise, the proto-evangelium. He declared that while the serpent would bruise the heel of the woman's offspring, a future seed would arise to crush the serpent's head. It was a declaration of war against darkness and a promise that the story would not end in the shadows. Even as they prepared for departure, they carried with them the hope of a coming Redeemer who would undo the fall and restore the broken bond between man and heaven. The final departure was a scene of agonizing finality. The Creator drove the man and his wife out of Eden, sending them into the harsh, untamed wilderness beyond the garden's borders. To ensure they could not return to the tree of life, God stationed powerful cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the entrance. Adam and Eve stepped onto the rocks, the gates of paradise closing with the weight of eternity. Their feet, once accustomed to soft moss, now felt the sting of the dust. They were exiles bearing the scars of rebellion, yet they did not go alone. They carried the memory of the light and the promise of a morning when the sword would be lowered and the children of the dust would finally be invited back home to the Father's side.